All right, everyone, let's just get through this. So, after the unbridled joy that was I Am Not Starfire, the next DCYA book has come out, and it is Unearthed, a Jessica Cruz story by Lilium Rivera and Steph C. So, where to begin with a work such as this? Well, first of all, let's look at the cover before I get too far into the review of the story. So, I am treated to this really oddly deformed face with this flat head, long flat head, and he's just this droopy black eye. It's just a very odd creative choice, and we'll get a bit more into what I think of the look of this book after the review. But before we can get too far into that, let's just dissect this turd of a book and get this going. So, Jessica Cruz, for those of you who don't know the character, is a Green Lantern in the DC Universe. She's actually a character that I rather like. One of the reasons I gave this book a chance. She is initially she's a reformed villain. She got her ring from a character named Power Ring, who is the Green Lantern from a Justice League that comes from a world where the Justice League is evil. She got the ring, she reforms, and she also comes from a background of tragedy and some emotional trauma, to where she suffered a very traumatic experience while off with some friends of hers. And as a result, she actually has developed agoraphobia. She's kind of afraid of the world outside of her house, which is something she has to overcome to be a hero in the DC Universe. So she's always a character I kind of appreciated. I was hoping maybe there'd be a chance that would shine through and make this book a little bit better, but that Jessica Cruz from the DC Universe has no relation to this character in this book at all. I mean, I don't even know why you had to make it Jessica Cruz. She bears no resemblance to the character, which is odd, because usually in these DCYA books, the character who's the subject is still at least, recognizable as who they are. I mean, Mandy from Starfire was a unique character. The one I read before, the Gotham High, I mean, it's still Bruce Wayne, Selena Kyle, Jack Napier. They still kind of took the archetypes of, the Catwoman, Joker, and Batman. It was a bit recognizable. This is just way off on its own. But anyway, let's get into this. So Jessica Cruz is the child of an undocumented family, and she goes to a high school in the United States. She is a dreamer. She's part of the DACA Act. She is a good student, and she's a volunteer at her local museum that has an exhibit on the Aztec gods that she's really enamored with. So in the museum program, she meets a new friend, John Stewart, who is, as you know, in the regular comics, also a Green Lantern. But he doesn't really play a huge part in the story. We'll get into him a little bit. So anyway, Jessica Cruz comes from a weird world where all women are linebackers. She is the smallest of a group of friends, where one of them is a running back for the Baltimore Ravens, and the other one is this weird girl that always wears pink that seems to have ants all over her face all the time. Odd creative choice, but okay. So her friends and her school do not know her undocumented status, and she's afraid of them ever finding out. While coming home from school one day, she actually sees an undocumented person arrested outside of the school bus window, and it's really traumatizing to her, because she thinks to herself, by the grace of God, that could be me and my family someday. And this happens to her a lot. She seems to live in some kind of a police state where ICE agents roam the street like Imperial stormtroopers and just snatch undocumented people off the streets willy-nilly. Because it happens more than once in the first several pages, and you can probably already see it. They are telegraphing that someone in her family is going to run afoul of an ICE agent, and we'll get to that. So this causes her to go on a bit of a journey, and she goes to a strange school where all they do is walk into a room. A teacher asks what political topic we want to talk about today, and they all just kind of sit around and discuss it for the school day. At first, I thought it was just kind of maybe her civics class, but that seems to be all that they do in this school. Also, as kind of a backdrop to this story, there is this woman who's kind of Karen incarnate running for mayor. She's running on a platform of cleaning up the city of homeless and illegal immigrants. and which is an odd platform, being that I think Coast City has always been kind of a stand-in for Los Angeles in the DC universe, and being from California, that kind of thing, that kind of candidate wouldn't get very far in that city. So one day she has a vision, and she is visited by one of the Aztec gods from the displays that she is so enamored with. And that is, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the goddess's name, but she is the Aztec goddess of earth and protection. And she tells Jessica that she is a smart, compassionate person, and that she needs to be a bridge from the just to the unjust. And Jessica kind of takes this as a bit of a call to action, but she doesn't really do a lot with it. This book is almost 200 pages, and by God, you feel every bit of it. It took me a long time to get to where we see anything resembling a story. But one of the things that she does take from her little vision is that there's this running theme that her friends always ask her to go out and do something. She always says no. She always has an excuse, partially because she's afraid of somehow her being out leading to her getting in trouble, getting deported, whatever. So she always says no when her friends ask her to go out and do something. So she decides that based on the message that she needs to have her people around her, that she's going to say yes. And so her friends ask her to go with them to a party, and she does. And they end up going to the party of kind of one of the rich white kids at the school. They make a lot of comments on, they didn't realize he had so much money and this and that. And she finds out that there's drinking at this teenage party. It's a teenage drinking party, and Jessica is just shocked and appalled that they would have the audacity to serve alcohol at a party involving high school seniors and juniors. So she wants to leave, but before that happens, the police get called, and Jessica freaks out because she's afraid that if she is caught at a party with alcohol and drinking underage, that will endanger her DACA status. So she tries to escape, but they say, don't worry about it. The party host is talking to him. He's going to deal with it. He does. He talks to the police, and then he turns around and he says, hey, it's okay, everybody. Somebody just called in a noise complaint, so we just need to keep it down, and everything will be fine. And this throws Jessica into a rage, even though that was a perfectly normal police procedural thing to do. If all you're doing is responding to a noise, is to just knock on the door and tell the people to keep it down. But Jessica thinks that this is just his privilege being thrown in her face because if a police officer came to her door, life as she knows it could be over, which is a valid point in her defense. But this rage opens her up to being approached in another vision by this guy, the Aztec god of mirrors and smoke. He is an angry, fiery war god, and he tells Jessica that her anger is actually the key to affecting the change that she wants, and that only through fire and destruction can the unjust world be brought just. So this starts her on now another journey where she becomes very confrontational. She calls people out on their crap. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. She doesn't think anybody can understand what they're going through. She ends up getting kicked out of class. She ends up getting kicked out of her program, her museum program, because she's just such an angry person to be around. And then several chapters into the story, what we knew was going to happen finally does happen, and her father gets arrested by ICE agents right in front of her face, and she wants to run out and do something about it, but her neighbor and mother stop her and say, no, it'll endanger your DACA status if you go out and interfere with police arresting your father. So she just has to watch helplessly as her father is hauled away by ICE troops or ICE officers. That leads us into the next chapter of the book. Her and her mother are depressed and just kind of going through the motions of life without their dad, and she decides the best course of action is going to be to take revenge against the Latino police officer that arrested her father, because he is, book's words not mine, a traitor to their race, and he's hunting down his own people. So this puts her at a crossroads with the two deities, the watery, earthy goddess of protection and the fiery, angry god of smoke and mirrors, as to which direction that she should go. And basically, the rest of the story, the two Aztec gods are just kind of the angel and demons on her shoulders. One's telling her, yes, follow your anger. The other one's saying, no, you should go ahead and you be nice, be protected, or use common sense, protect people, do what I told you to do in the original vision that you had with me. And she has to choose which path that she's going to go down, and that's going to affect the rest of her life. So she chooses the Angry Dome path, And one day when her and Jon Stewart are driving around, what do they see out their car window but the same Latino police officer that arrested her father, and he's now arresting another undocumented worker, or so she thinks. She just sees the same officer arresting a person and assumes that he's arresting her for being undocumented. Now, pause. We know, because we've been reading this dribble and we have been getting hammered over the head by political messages of undocumented people in America, that we know that that's probably what's happening. But there is no way for Jessica Cruz to know that what this police officer or this ICE officer is arresting this woman for. And that's kind of important for what happens next, because what Jess decides to do after she kind of snaps with anger is she stops him from arresting her, helps her escape, lures the police officer to like an abandoned construction site or something like that, and ends up beating him with a chain and just leaving him there on the ground. And then she just kind of, after she beats the officer with a chain, she hugs the lady and lets her go. And I had to stop and think to myself, what are you doing, you ham and bologna sandwich? You don't know what this woman is. She could have robbed a bank. She could have burned down a hospital. You're the DC universe, or at least an offshoot of it. She could be from Arkham Asylum for all you know. But it doesn't matter. Whatever Jessica says or does is fine. And so she just lets her go. All is fine. All is forgiven. There's no consequence for helping a fugitive escape, stopping an arrest, interfering with a police officer, or beating a police officer with a chain. We're just going to go ahead and move on from that story. So she goes back to school and she decides that she's done her anger thing now, that she got the revenge out of her system. So now she's going to go back to her becoming the bridge thing. And she joins a student protest, and she manages to get on the news, because at this point, the evil Karen lady has won and become the mayor of the city. And so she gets on the news and confesses to the world that she is undocumented and that her father had been arrested, and it's not fair. And after that, she finds out that Jon Stewart is moving away, and so she says goodbye to him. She goes home, and her father is released from the holding facility and gets to come home, and they get to be a family again. We don't know why. That's never explained. The end. That is the nonsensical plot for Greenland, or Jessica Cruz Unearthed. What a complete and utter nonsense this was. So, I honestly could probably drone on about the flaws that have to do with this book 4 hours. And believe me, this is actually my second time recording this video. I did. But when I looked and saw that the running time on that video was beyond excessive, I decided that I can boil my problems down with this story to just a couple of elements. The first element is the writing. It's paced so sluggishly. As I said, this book is nearly 200 pages long, and you feel every single flip of those pages. This story reads like trudging through the La Brea tar pits. It was a really, really difficult task to get through this story. I mean, I found myself around page 75 just stopping and wondering when we were going to get to anything that resembled a story, because I was nearly 100 pages into a book, and all I know is that the author has very strong opinions about immigration. Jessica is a good student. Jessica's got some friends that she never goes out and hangs out with, and she's got a loving home life. It took them nearly 100 pages to establish that. And in comic book terms, that's a lot. When you're dealing with a visual medium and a picture can tell 1,000 words, that's a lot. So that made it hard for me to really get into the story, because there's nothing happens that actually hooks you. You don't actually start seeing any story elements till you're halfway through, and then once that happens, everything starts happening very, very quickly. And it's really jarring to go from something that's moving at the speed of a glacier to just things happening one after another so fast that you don't even know what led to transition from one event to the next. And then the story just ends with no real explanation. The character assaults a police officer. There's no consequence for that. You'd think she'd at least get in trouble for having beat a police officer with a chain. But no, it's just something she does. And because she's perfectly justified in doing it, because she wanted revenge, and that's perfectly fine because the god of smoke and mirrors told her that. Jon Stewart is kind of just a non-factor in this story. He's just kind of there to be supportive, and then at one point in the story, he just leaves, and we never see or hear from him again. So that is just really, really rough. The second problem I have with the story, I know on this channel it's a rule that I try not to criticize harshly artwork because art is subjective. I know that they're just out there grinding, trying to make a living, but we have to at least talk about some of the creative choices that were made in this book. So Jessica Cruz and all of the characters have these just straight dead eyes, and it is so weird to me. It is so hard to get into the story when I'm seeing this, and it was really giving me vibes of the movie Coraline and the Other Mother with the buttons for eyes. They just look lifeless. They look strange. It's like they're ghosts or something. I don't know. I really didn't like it. We also need to talk about Jessica's size because it's not that it's bad. Well, it depends on the page. It's highly inconsistent. A page like this, she looks perfectly normal. A page like this, she looks perfectly normal. But we go a little bit further into the book, and she just kind of gets bigger and bigger. It's very odd. Now, most of the women in the story are kind of built like linebackers as it is, like I said before. But yeah, Jessica Cruz herself, like her friend who's really big, she was really big at the beginning. Like, here's Jessica here again. Like I said, her friend was really big in the beginning and stays that way the whole time. Jessica was pretty normal proportion, but as the story goes on, her shoulders just get wider and further apart. And then we do have to talk about her head. I mean, this weird decision to give her like this odd flat head that is almost box-like in some angles. It's just very strange to me. And one thing that's anatomically true about a human being is the distance between the tip of your chin and the bridge of your nose is equal to the bridge of your nose to the tip of your skull. That is not the case with Jessica Cruz. Partially because her head seems to have gone through some kind of a disc sander and has had the whole top arch of it sanded away. So that's really off-putting. And I understand that art is subjective, but at the same time, you got to get the basics right. You know, you look at a cartoon that looks very, noodly and surreal, something like Adventure Time or an old Disney cartoon, but you need to understand most of the time the artists that design those characters have a solid grasp on anatomy. That's why you can take a character, exaggerate them so much, and still have it be believable. But if you're getting the anatomy parts of it wrong, then you're going to take your reader out of the immersion of it because we're focusing. I mean, look at the way her friend is moved here. I don't even know where parts of her begin and end. The body has certain bony markers, and like this shoulder is lost, this hip is lost. I honestly don't know where any parts of her begin or end. And then you've got her freckles that are just really inconsistent and makes it just look like she's got bugs all over her face. But that's about all I'm going to say about the art at this point. The next problem I have with this book is Jessica herself. So Jessica has 3 modes she circles through. Jessica doubts herself. She is afraid of the future. She will go talk to somebody, Jon Stewart, her school counselor, her best friends, the Aztec gods, and they tell her that she's beautiful and she's strong and she's got this. You got this, girl. And then she comes out of that and she's filled with a new sense of purpose and conviction and confidence, and that lasts for about 3 pages. Then she's down on herself again, and she needs somebody else to tell her that she's good and she's beautiful and she's strong and she's brave. And that gets tiresome after a while because it's almost as if she's just some weird kind of parasitic friend that wanders from person to person just seeking compliments. I mean, Jon Stewart's only purpose in this story is to tell her every 10 pages or so that she's brave and she's strong and that she's going to figure this out. I mean, it gets so bad that after Jon Stewart does it, after her friends do it, after her parents do it, after her neighbor does it, after her guidance counselor does it, after the head of her college, her museum internship does it. I mean, even the eldritch creatures that are the Aztec gods have to come down and do it. Everybody has to reaffirm her all the time, and it doesn't last very long. It's like a drug to her. It's weird, and it's hard to just sit and keep watching. It's the same story beat, and it repeats from beginning to end every 6 pages or so. And it was exhausting to try to read through. She's also like some weird kind of two-faced character where she goes from I am a student, I am a future scholar, I am learned, I am educated, I'm well-spoken, and I'm going to be the bridge of ideals, and I'm going to beat this with my mind and my ability to communicate with people, to I am angry and vengeance incarnate, and I'm going to beat a cop with a chain. And Those changes happen at the blink of an eye, and she goes from one to the other, then back again throughout this entire story. There's no consequences for when she gives into the anger. There's no good results from when she tries to solve things civilly. It's just really odd. It's hard. I don't know what she's supposed to be. Is she an angry person who is going to force change through acts of disobedience and violence, or is she going to try to change hearts and minds with her superior ability to communicate? I don't know. I'm not sure what she is. It's very strange. It's an odd thing to see. So Jessica is just all over the place. She's not a well-established character. I don't know where she is or what she's going to do. There's no consequences for what she's going to do, and she really doesn't do anything that directly affects the outcome of the story. So it's just kind of like she's here, she's reading a story along with us. We get about half the details, but you got to fill the rest in ourselves. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the politics of this book. And I'm not going to say either way. You feel whatever you want about, the immigration status in this country that talks about white privilege with the friend at his party and how the cops are nice to him and that wouldn't never happen in her neighborhood. All of that is subjective. But no matter what you think of your politics and which side you fall on, the idea that you can just browbeat your reader for 200 pages with your political beliefs is really, really hard. This was a ham-fisted punch in the face of this author's views on the state of immigration in the United States. And it's okay to have a theme in there, a reference in there, or that's the backdrop. It was front and center from beginning to end. You cannot get away from it. Like I said before, it's just, I think she saw people getting arrested and hauled away by ICE agents no less than 6 times in this book. It just happens over and over and over again. And part of the problem when you take an issue like immigration, which regardless of how you feel about it, you have to admit it is a complicated issue. There are lots of layers. So when you take something that's as complicated, as complex and multifaceted as the idea of immigration in this country and break it down to one side is good, one side is evil, you kind of sound like you don't know what you're talking about. Because you're forgetting a lot of angles, you're missing a lot of points, and whatever side you're arguing, you are arguing from such a myopic and narrow-minded viewpoint that it gets to be ridiculous. Now, a way to have balanced this in a story like this would have been to, I don't know, have that Latino officer that Jessica Cruz was so angry at for arresting her father, rather than beating him with a chain, she tries to stop him from arresting her, and he explains to her that I am an agent of the United States government. I don't have a choice. Leaders, people above me tell me what to do, and I have to do those things because I swore an oath to protect this country, and this is my job. And maybe show the other side of that. And her vengeance doesn't come from the fact that she helps a girl escape and beats him with a chain. Maybe she talks him down. Maybe she talks him into turning a blind eye to this girl for once. And because she is such a strong orator, which is what they kind of established her as at the beginning, she convinces the officer to let somebody go, let them off the hook. That would have been probably a more satisfying resolution to that problem, while at the same time showing that, hey, you know what, the other side, they have their views, they have what they're doing, they're not evil, but they have their own set of circumstances that is different than yours. They have a point of view that's different than yours, and having her overcome that by talking it through and actually having people that act like other rational human beings on the other side of an issue like this would have been refreshing, and maybe could have made this story pretty poignant and could have made this story something that I would have got something out of. But in the meantime, this was just ham-fisted punch in the face, one after another, of one author's politics. And it took front and center, and it was going to be what came through. Stories be damned, characters be damned, consequences be damned, structure be damned, nothing. The one thing she wanted to get out of you was what her point of view and how she views this one issue, and everything else was second or third on her list. Because I can tell you, character development doesn't happen in the story, story structure doesn't happen in the story. Even when the resolution happens, it just happens. It's almost like she feels like, well, the story has to have an ending, so here, the father's out of jail. How does that happen? Who knows? The end. So, yeah, I mean, that is Unearthed, the Jessica Cruz story. So, can I recommend this book? Absolutely not. This is one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. Now, of course, this is going to draw the comparison. I Am Not Starfire, which is worse? And that's a very good question. I Am Starfire is something I really dislike. Mandy is an awful character, but if I'm to compare Mandy to Jessica, at least Mandy is consistent. She is an awful person from beginning to end. You know what she knows what she's about. She may go through a few changes. She kind of changed the way she viewed about her mother and everything else, but in the end, she doesn't compromise that she's just awful. Jessica Cruz is all over the dang place. She's angry, she's articulate, she's compassionate, she's violent, she's confident, she's scared. She doesn't nail anything down. So I have to say Mandy's at least a better written character. She's more solid. She's more established. I know what she is. Jessica's just this weird amorphous thing that has to be reassured constantly. Story-wise, I'd say they're both about equally unappealing. I think that anytime you approach a political matter with such a heavy-handed approach, you're not going to tell a good story, and that's perfectly the case here. I think the artwork does us no favors, where at least in the I Am Not Starfire, I found some things that the artist did mildly interesting. The resolutions were unsatisfying in both stories. While I felt I Am Not Starfire meandered and just carried on and on at the end, this meanders and carries on from page 1 through the end. So ultimately, yeah, I would probably put I Am Not Starfire above this just absolute turd of a book. So that's all I've got to say, and honestly, I think that's more attention than this book deserves. So if you read this, I want to know if you agree with me. Comments below. Let's talk about this mess. Did you read it? Are you thinking about reading it? If you saw a cover that looked like this, would you buy it? These are the kind of things that I want to know. While you're down there in the comments, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, share the video, help the channel grow. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you sticking with me through this review. This was a tough one to get through, and hopefully next we're gonna talk about something a bit more fun and enjoyable. Hopefully something comes out tomorrow that can put me in a better headspace, because man, this one was hard. This was a tough book. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign off with that. I will talk to you in the next